Welcome, everyone. I'm Nitin Sawhney, and we're delighted to participate in PDC this year. Anh-Ton and I have been examining how design practitioners grapple with issues of contestation in PD projects, particularly those in urban and neighborhood contexts. In this presentation, we'll showcase outcomes emerging from three interrelated case studies, and which served as a basis for a framework we're calling Ecologies of Contestation, and we'll discuss the implications of our findings for design education and practice going forward.
Here's a beautiful PD project that transformed this neglected street in Cambridge. This is one of the cases that we examined in our paper. In many ways, this project was exemplary of a great PD project. These designers engage in a series of workshops with the school and children who frequently use this street to craft a playful reimagination of what this place could be, building their capacities to design the street themselves. But like many other PD projects, this project faced difficult challenges and became quite messy. And that is what we wanted to investigate. So we set out and began to survey and interview urban participatory practitioners. Of the ones we interviewed, we selected designers whose work had exemplary contestations and unpacked their projects in a series of workshops held at the New School.
PD is often idealized on the basis of a Habermasian notion of deliberative democracy. Here, participation is governed by the norms of equality and symmetry. Salia bin Habib actually criticizes this position, explaining that these idealized notions in public space rarely exist. Conditions of power imbalance clearly bias possible outcomes. Chantal Mouffe offers us an alternative theory and framework that embraces the messiness that PD often does not highlight. Mouffe thinks that in democracy, there needs to be room for dissent to accommodate multiple viewpoints and power structures embedded in society. So she believes that for democracy, agonistic confrontation is in fact its very condition of existence. One place to turn in dealing with these contingencies in PD is participatory action research. PAR inevitably results in a commitment to reflexivity, and this is a very crucial thing to reconcile in contestation. While PAR has influenced PD in many ways over the years, we believe it also challenges the way PD is often viewed and conducted today. The cyclical process of research, action, planning, and reflection in PAR allows researchers and participants to learn from each iteration of the inquiry and adapt their goals, methods, and actions along the way. The ethos of PAR challenges us to be aware of our positionality, which is crucial to embrace contestation.
So we wanted to create a framework to help us understand how these conflicts actually emerge, and we're inspired by ecology, which studies how organisms interact with their surrounding environments. It's the interactions between these different layers that causes contestations to emerge. The largest layer is the sociocultural context that a project sits within. The ecologies of power are the power structures that these projects are beholden to. The constructed ecologies are how the artifacts are negotiated and materialized based on these power structures. And the value-based ecologies are the values that the participants and the designers wish to be represented in the endeavor.
We found these layered ecologies played a crucial role in different ways. The sociocultural and power-based ecologies were most prominent in a large-scale participatory project conducted across New York City. In 2017, Mayor Bill de Blasio unveiled Create NYC, detailing New York City's cultural plan. The city took a fairly top-down approach, hiring design firms to lead the participatory process. In our interviews, we learned that it ended up being a far more tokenistic form of participation, where outcomes were predetermined, especially around notions of social equity and what constitutes cultural support for communities in NYC. Interestingly, though, a coalition of community organizations, artists, activists, and labor groups responded with their very own version of a cultural plan, the People's Cultural Plan. This plan focused on the ways communities of color remain underfunded and dispossessed in the guise of culture. Within this power ecology, these stakeholders self-organized and created new neighborhood initiatives that better reflect local values, conditions, and priorities. These two plans shouldn't be seen as antagonistic, but rather as parallel visions working in tandem. So the social cultural ecology of New York City and the ecologies of power among top-down agencies and grassroots neighborhood groups led to alternative discourses in the very definition of culture, inclusion, and equity. While Create NYC's agenda moved forward, many advocacy groups established their own local alternatives and lobbied resources from the city to implement them.
Through our workshop that unpacked the People's Cultural Plan, we met members of the civic data startup STAY. STAY works closely with cities and governments to create uniform APIs and interfaces that collates all of the civic data and makes it accessible in the ethos of open data. When it comes to urban data, there is already a power struggle around accessibility from companies to government. An issue they wanted to examine was their work around the contestations of city bike lanes and their obstruction. So we co-led a workshop to unpack these issues of urban mobility through STAY's tool. Participants get an overview of civic data and how data can be used to drive decision-making. When it came time to actually work with STAY's tools, though, tensions emerged. We found that the data is coded in a way that isn't legible to the public, even if they can access it. It was clear that the power structures were also inherent in the data infrastructure itself. The constructed ecology reflected the ecologies of power because you need to have expertise to read the data, let alone act on it. So how do designers reconcile these different ecologies to transform emergent antagonism into agonism? Let's return to the first case. In transforming this street, the designers hit a contestation when skaters began to use the space and caused noise complaints for a few neighbors. And it's here that we see how a Habermasian deliberative democracy doesn't work. The response from the designers was to do more exemplary PD through interviews, observations, and workshops, even if the city wouldn't fund it. But they had to face the contestation head on when despite this, the city threatened to put in skate deterrents that could potentially harm unknowing community members. So ultimately, they had to reconcile their values with the ecologies of power in the context of their PD project by removing these mounds that you see people sitting on and replacing them with grass. To preserve the integrity of the project, they altered their playful design to maintain the street as a community space as wished by the participants. We found that these contestations then are not an exception, but a norm that end up transforming many PD projects. This often is not surfaced in public discourse.
Concerns around such ecologies of contestation in PD is something that design education can address critically. What we've proposed in this paper is a framework for students and practitioners to explicitly recognize contestations that are bound to emerge. There are crucial opportunities to bring up these issues across the life cycle of a PD project and generate constructive ways for critically discussing and negotiating them through the design process. We hope this work has been thought-provoking for you as it has been for us, and we look forward to your questions and feedback.